So in this video, we're just going to very briefly define what the idea of an artificial neural network is. So this is one particular model that can be used for various machine learning tasks, and oftentimes, very commonly, it is used in a particular fashion with hyperparameters set in a certain way, and those words will make a little more sense in a minute, in order to implement what are known as deep learning networks. So if you remember back to part one, we define deep learning as a subset of machine learning, and deep learning in this case is going to be nothing more than when we're working with artificial neural networks that have multiple layers. And as we'll see in the video, that actually replicates the way that our brain processes information. So an artificial neural network, which very few people put the artificial word in there, it's just kind of understood. So more commonly called a neural network or an NN, really just describes a collection of these mathematical objects, which are represented by the circles. And you can think of the arrows as being nothing more than information going into the particular mathematical function, or if it's going out of the circle, obviously that is information going out. So these neurons just perform a calculation in such a way that's inspired by the way that our actual brain works. And of course, the term neuron, if you're familiar at all with biology of particularly the anatomy of the brain, you're familiar with the fact that our brain is actually composed of these fundamental cells called neurons. And they have a similar architecture, right? They have the capability to actually take information in, and actually, if the input stimulation reaches a particular level, they have a capability to fire and produce an output, and that output serves as input for the actual next neuron down the chain. So the way that our brains work, and I'm intentionally glancing over some of the terminology there because it's not a biology course, but for those of you that are familiar with dendrites and axons, that is what we have going on there. But the key thing that I want you to realize is the way that your brain actually thinks is in this kind of propagating or structured way that resembles the architecture of a neural network. So when someone says that a neural network is designed like a brain, they don't only mean the fundamental computational unit, which is this neuron that's taking inputs, it's weighting them, it's adding a bias term, and that's giving the activation, and then the activation goes into a nonlinear function and actually produces the output. That's way too much detail for this class, but that is what is going on. But the key thing to note is, in addition to a single neuron in your brain working kind of the same way with its axons and dendrites, in addition, the way that the individual neurons are structured or connected to one another, particularly in this layered type architecture, actually resembles the brain as well. So when you take a vertical slice here, this is known as the input layer. These two layers are known as hidden layers, and this is known as the output layer. Now, the number of layers, along with the number of nodes in a layer, are hyperparameters of the network. They're numbers or parameters that define how the network looks, but they can't be learned. The individual weights that are used to actually multiply the inputs along with the biases, those are actually parameters that are learned during the training process. You don't have to know that for this class, but it's always good to hear things multiple times. It kind of starts to build up this terminology in your mind. Key point here is that the structure, the way that this is actually laid out, gives a capability to approximate very, very complicated functions. Actually, it can be shown that artificial neural networks are universal function approximators. So they can learn any type of mapping or mathematical relationship that you want in supervised learning. It's just a matter of training them such that the parameters, the weights, and the biases can be updated appropriately. So the thing that we're trying to draw an analogy to here is, if we look at the architecture of your brain, it consists of neurons that communicate to one another. So the underlying inspiration of an artificial neural network is based upon the brain in terms of the individual computation unit and the way that it's actually connected. And here you see a little bit more of how an actual artificial neuron or node is working. You have a bunch of inputs. What's going to happen is all of these inputs are going to be multiplied by a number. So for those of you that have seen linear algebra, it's going to be a linear combination of the inputs. Those parameters are what is actually learned. In addition, we're going to have a bias term that's added on. That's going to be a term that's learned as well. And that linear combination of the inputs plus the bias is going to produce a number. And that number is the actual activation. And that activation goes into a nonlinear function. And the particular type of nonlinear function, like a sigmoid or whatnot, depends on the particular neural network. But that nonlinearity, so the linear combination serves as the input, it goes into the function, becomes nonlinear, produces an output. That is going to be the number that's basically propagated on in the actual neural network. So wrong way there. But the key thing I wanted you to know there is that the most common kind of model that's used in modern supervised learning is a neural network. A neural network is said to be deep if there's a lot of hidden layers here. So one thing I might ask you on the discussion board is, in this particular neural network diagram that I've showed, how many hidden layers are there? And another thing that you should know is this is inspired by the way that the human brain processes information, both in terms of the single computational node, which acts like a neuron cell in our brain, but also the way that they're interconnected and kind of structured in a hierarchical fashion. So I will see you all in the next video.